Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I'm watching Can Chess with Hexagons by CGP Grey. I watched this video, Hexagons are the bestagons, and he mentioned something about chess with hexagons in that video. So I'm watching this now. Link to the original video will be down in the description below.
Chess, the game of war on 64 squares. But, I wondered, can chess with hexagons?
How would you even make it work?
There have been several attempts,
with
the
hexagons?
most successful published in a book in the UK in 1973, which I promptly ordered to investigate. And while waiting for one of the remaining copies to be pulled out of the back of a used bookstore who knows where, I realized to try hexagon chess when it arrived, I would need a hexagonal chess
Yeah, you need a board.
something the internet does not make, so I would need to make one myself. While a grid of squares can simply alternate two colors without touching, I mean, unless you count the diagonals, a hexagonal grid needs 3 colors for no touching, and finding pre-made hexes in 3 nice matching shades to make my board was a lot harder than I expected, and when I found some, they ended up being a lot bigger than I expected, but I didn't realize.
Couldn't he just take some cardboard and some markers to make 3 different colors and cut it out himself? I don't feel like it would have been that difficult.
That until after I had ordered rather a lot of them. You may be wondering why I didn't just, draw a hex board.
Yes!
That's an excellent question that did not occur to me until after lots of hexagons and...
See, this is why you think before you do something. He bought God knows how many of these hexagons, and he's probably not even going to use any of them, because they're too big. And he could have just drawn a board himself.
Chess pieces began arriving at my door. What can I say? Brains are weird, and this brain needed to finish what it started and build the board. A square chessboard has a correct orientation, white on your right, and so too does hex chess have a correct orientation. When building your board, start with black on top, white below, and gray to either side. Then grow the pattern out so no color touches another until you have 2 edges each 6 spaces long. Then complete the pattern until the mega hexagon has 6
I still don't see how this could work.
sides. Black goes with black and white with white. After completing my board, the book did arrive, which detailed all of the rules, and included this delightful pamphlet to join the Hex Chess Association by calling this number with
That can't be a real thing, right?
The book
There's no
also
way.
came with, it turned out, a hex chessboard. But too late. My board was made, and I was going to use this board to show you how the pieces move.
All you have to do
Beginning
was
with
check that.
the most humble, the pawn. In square chess, the pawn moves forward 1 space at a time and can capture other pieces on the forward diagonals. I've always thought of this as a soldier with a shield protecting his front and a short sword that can jab to either side. The 8 pawns with their diagonal attacks form self-defending walls that the other pieces can support or push off from, and it's these structures that make pawns the soul of chess.
Do they just
In hex chess, pawn movement is mostly unchanged. Move
on 3
forward
ways?
1 space at a time, capture to the forward sides. To keep their soulful nature, this is the pawn starting arrangement in hex chess. Note there are now 9 pawns needed to complete the defensive structure, which is buffed from square chess and buffed again as the pawns begin.
He needs 9, but if you use 9 of them, let's say you move all of them forward by 1 space. You now have 2 spaces, 1 on each side, that are completely empty. So you can't actually make a full line. It's just not possible. You'll always have 1 space on each side empty.
The game defending each other. Pawns also have 2 special moves. The first is, if they make it to the back row, a pawn gets promoted to any piece other than a king. Here we see the first interesting side effect of a hex board. In square chess, every time a pawn captures, it gets 1 space closer to the back row for promotion. But on a hex board, a pawn capturing toward the center is still the same distance from the back as before. Capturing away from the center, however...
But another thing you have to consider, in regular chess, he had 2 rooks. One of them could have killed the pawn, but now the rook here can't kill the pawn because there's no straight space. It's not straight. He would have to move, I guess, down and then back up. Unless it works different, I don't know.
Brings a pawn closer to promotion.
This chess piece would work.
Controlling the center of the board is vital, but now in hex chess, there's a slight disincentive to pawn capture centerward, and thus a slight incentive to spread the game outward. The next special power of pawns is the first time a pawn moves, it can move 2 spaces. This is the same in hex chess, though pawns get another bit of a buff. If the first time a pawn captures, it lands on the starting space of another pawn, it's still allowed to move forward too. My guess is this rule came about out of playtesting. In square chess, it's impossible for a pawn to end up on the starting square of a neighbor. It's forward or nothing,
that is true,
but
yeah.
not so in hex chess. So buffing the pawns this way is just practical, so you mostly don't have to keep track of which pawn started.
So I guess it's less of the pawn being able to move 2 spaces from the start and more if you have a pawn on a pawn space, you can move 2 spaces for your first move.
Where? It doesn't matter. The last special pawn power is en passant, aka the top sneaky capture. If an enemy pawn moves forward 2 spaces past yours, such that you could have captured it if the enemy had only moved forward 1, you still can. This rule always trips up noobs in square chess, and it's here to do the same in hex chess in the same way. Okay, that's pawns.
I don't
On
play
to
chess.
the rook. The rook is the most similar piece in both games. In square chess, it can move any number of unblocked spaces horizontally or vertically, and can
how's that gonna work in Hexagons,
in its way. Now, on the hex board, there is no horizontal, but there are what are called files, straight lines that pass through.
So you can move in 3
spaces.
directions.
Rooks can move along any file, which feels pretty buffed from.
Yeah, so like when you had the pawn in this space on a square chessboard, the rook could have killed it. But here, it can't do that, because it just can't move to the left or to the right.
Square chess, and I don't mind one bit. While chess is often symbolized with the knight, my simple pleb-rated heart has always been with the rook. Rook smash. Personal preferences aside, this adaptation to hexagonification makes
how's a
sense.
knight gonna
A square
work?
shares sides with 4 true neighbors. A hexagon shares side with 6 neighbors. So horizontal or vertical motion, a hexagon.
Wait a second. If the rook moves this way, the queen is going to be the exact same, isn't she? Because how else would the queen move? The queen is just going to be the exact same as the rook, unless there's some special rule for her.
Shares side with 6 neighbors. So horizontal or vertical motion on a hex board translates to a straight line through a series of neighbors, which is exactly what the hex rook does. Once you think of these lines as being the new horizontal and vertical, the capturing and blocking of pieces in hex chess works exactly the same as square chess. Now, on to the knight. Knights too are pretty similar to their square versions. Square knights jump forward 2 spaces, over 1. And since we now know what straight on a hex board looks like, the hex knight jumps straight 2 and then over 1. This jumping motion is knight jump.
Holy shit. Ugh. In normal chess, the knight has 8 moves. In this, he has 12. But he also seems to go a lot further, even though he's still moving the exact same amount, 3 spaces. But it looks like he's moving more because the board is just, it seems bigger.
Straight 2 and then over 1. This jumping motion is unique in the game, allowing knights to skip over any pieces in the way and capture what they land on. Just like the hex rook, the hex knight has more freedom of motion on the hex board, 12 spaces versus 8. But this freedom of motion expansion isn't the case for all pieces, which brings us to the bishop. The square bishop moves only on the diagonals, forever limiting each to the color they start on. And this diagonal motion lets the bishop slide through pieces that seem like they should block it, but don't, because diagonals. So how does this translate to hex chess? Well, what diagonal means isn't obvious at first glance. Going back to the rook as a reminder, while these look like diagonals,
it can only go on the gray spaces.
So what's a bishop to do? Well, as we've already seen, diagonal motion on square boards is sort of weird, and one reason to use a hex board, like many modern games do, is to ditch the diagonals. But if you really need them, as poor bishops do, hex boards can diagonal too, and the clue is in the colors. This is diagonal motion on a hex board. The hex the bishop is on points the way to the next diagonals, quite literally. Which, when you think about it, is the same as on a square board, it's just less noticeable.
See, that's interesting. Let's say you have a bishop and a pawn. Let's say the pawn is in this spot. The pawn can kill the bishop can kill the pawn. It depends on whose turn it is. But on the hexagon, if you have a pawn here and the bishop here, the bishop can kill the pawn, but the pawn cannot kill the bishop. So in a way, at least in that scenario, I guess the bishop would be kind of buffed on a hexagon board.
Quite literally. Which, when you think about it, is the same as on a square board. It's just less noticeable because diagonal squares share the pointing points and hex boards don't. I like this a lot because the hex board makes the strangeness of diagonal motion more apparent in a way square boards conceal. And it makes it more like what the bishop lacks in board coverage it gains in diagonal exploitation, sort of teleporting along sight lines. If this is hard to see, I've found it easier to think of the bishop as existing in its own dimension that only partially overlaps with the rest of the game, a monochrome world other pieces move into and out of. And viewing it this way also makes it really clear a hex board really nerfs each bishop. Yes, it can move in 6 directions, but there are so few spaces. To make up for that, in hex chess, you get 1 extra bishop to match the extra color.
You get
so each
3 of them?
covers its third of the
one
board.
on each color.
There are
okay.
91 spaces in.
Yeah, see, that's what I was kind of curious about, because like you have 3 colors, but you only have 2 bishops, so they just add another one.
Total, 30 for black, 30 for white, and 31 for gray, which you might think makes the gray bishop slightly more valuable, but this extra space buff comes with the nerf of no ability to attack pieces cornered in the corners and can make endgames trickier. That's the bishop done, and now that you understand its motion, we can move on to the queen. The queen in square chess moves in straight and diagonal lines, and it's the same with the hex queen.
So the queen can move like a rook and a bishop at the same time, of course. So she can just move pretty much anywhere.
The files as the rook would,
wherever the hell she wants.
What the hell is even that?
Look at this. Look at this. If you're in any spot around the queen, you lose that piece. What is this? She covers practically the whole board. Like, this is at least 50% of the entire board is just covered by the queen when she's in the middle. But she has a two spot zone around her, which she covers at all times. It's kind of OP.
The queen
at least
is
it
the
seems
most powerful
OP.
piece in square chess, but it's hilarious how godlike her freedom of motion looks on the hex board. Hilarious.
Look at this. You have 1 space that's covered on every way around the queen.
Hilarious how godlike.
But here, it's 2 spaces in every direction.
Like her freedom of motion looks on the hex board.
OP as
Absolutely
heck.
crushing the king. Capturing the king is the target of the game, and it is the poor king that is limited to moving just 1 square in any direction. Simple enough, and you might think that this is how the hex king would move, but don't forget those tricksy diagonals the points point the way to. This is one movement in any direction, either to a neighbor or teleporting 1 space of the same color. And given all of this, boy, does the king really need that extra escape move. In fact,
he
this
does.
additional freedom of motion makes him so much slipperier to catch that putting your opponent in stalemate, where the king can't make a non-suicidal move, considered a tie in square chess counts as 3/4 of a win in hex chess, basically winning. There's only one nerf for the king, which is castling doesn't exist because of how the pieces are set up, which we'll get to now. So you've got the board, you've got the pawns, then across the back row going inward, it's rooks, then knights, queen to the left, king to the right, and 3 bishops in the middle. That's the way hex chess works, and since I made this ridiculous board, I decided I might as well try it out. And since I had no one to play against, I played a game against myself, which turned out to be rather brain-bending. Not just because trying to remember all the new piece movements and patterns was really hard, but it was even harder to see them on the board and think with them. My game against myself did not go well.
Need to just have the rules constantly up to check them,
and turned what should have been a stalemate into losing quite badly to myself. But it sure was interesting and answered the question, can chess with hexagon? Yes.
Yeah.
Agon.
You know, that actually seems kind of interesting. I really want a hexagon chessboard now. It's more interesting than regular chess, in my opinion, because it's just so different, so weird. People should really start doing tournaments with hexagon chess. That would be way more interesting than regular ones. But I honestly doubt that hexagon chess is ever gonna become a big thing. I just don't see it happening because it's more complicated than regular chess, and people will probably just prefer the simpler version. But I personally would honestly much prefer to play the hexagon version. It just seems much cooler. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider subscribing and leaving a like. If you're interested, why not watch this video right here? And with that, I hope I'll see you in the next video.